Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. I've started doing the initiation work with a few men now. Very happy that that's getting moving, and I was having such an interesting interaction with one of the guys. I thought it might be worth doing a video on this very key teaching of men's initiation, especially when it comes to relationships and women and our ultimate role as men. Now, I dare say many of us who are interested in this area of life will have had challenges in some way. As I often say, challenges hit us in life and we normally scorn them. We say, why me? But in time, we learn that this adversity is very often the very path that we have to go through. This is perhaps the central masculine spiritual symbol and motif. The wound is the place that the light enters, as the Sufi poet Rumi put it. That's been repeated in a million different ways throughout spiritual literature, all sorts of different traditions. And I think in our modern lives as men, it's no different. The conditions around us might be different, but it will always be the challenge that will make you what you are. And challenges come in different ways, but fundamentally, what they all move towards is the coming to peace with yourself. Many of us are beset by pain or challenge that we never could have foreseen. And really, I don't think life is about pretending that it's all magical and we can have this happy, clappy life. I'd say the real life is bittersweet. It's at times ecstatic and at times tragic, and you can't avoid that. This is why I've personally got some issues with the self-development world. I mean, I'm very pro self-development on one sense and an external sense, but we shouldn't confuse it for spiritual work. Famous thing is, by all means, get in great shape, learn about the world, improve your mental mindset, improve your skills at work. Well, that's awesome. But that's not going to help you, when a family member gets hit by a truck and when you get a terminal cancer diagnosis, the real brutalities of life will still hit you, and personal development can do nothing then. So at this point, we need the much stronger stuff, and we will all be challenged by this. In fact, I think very often the men that are rooted deeply in the spiritual teaching will have often gone through some hardships. They normally might have done those hardships to themselves, been bad men in the past and had to work through it. Sometimes just things have happened to them, and they've had to turn that pain and suffering into wisdom. And one of the key things I think we learn through that process is stillness. I'm very eager to push this with the guys doing the work and the fellas over on the Substack, having a daily practice, even if it's just 2 minutes, where you get out of the noise of your mind, the noise of modernity, the noise of the internet. The reason for that is because we need to take back conscious space, which is your true identity, really. But we're so locked in the story of who we are, the story that the world is telling us all the time, that we're building all these identities, building angers, pains, and all sorts of stuff. And this can create so many pathologies for us in time. So the reason we're trying to be without judgment, without definition, without an analysis of what we're doing in that moment, but just be as you are totally, open-hearted, open-minded, is so the true life, the true self, the true soul can be as it is. It's astonishing how freeing this can be. The more you practice this, I often say, it's like brushing your teeth. When you're a kid, you don't want to brush your teeth. It feels stupid and pointless. Why do I have to do this? But as you grow up and you mature, you feel wrong if you haven't brushed your teeth. You don't feel fresh. Well, it's the same thing with this practice of contemplation. It's freshening your soul. And while I'm not going to say that we practice this and we end up being perfect, very often, many of us find that when we do practice this stillness, it becomes so beautiful that the world can seem harsh and it can seem prickly. And we can almost want to escape away from it. I remember having a chat with a friend who'd been away for a contemplation week, and he'd come back to London, and he said he felt like a raw wound walking through this abusive city. Which I think is a good way of putting it. You can feel a bit like that because you start to recognise the poison of the world. But the real work is to try and not necessarily expose that wound to all of the toxins of the world, but in essence allow that wound to heal, but at the same time go through into the deep sensitivity that is being human, and with that find which is beyond it. And this is the great spiritual metaphor of coming towards the peace that passes all understanding, as Christ would put it. And why I'm saying all of this is because so many men haven't had any spiritual guidance in this day and age. It was the same for me when I was growing up. So you just don't know we have recourse for action, for the pain of the mind, for the suffering of the world. It feels like that's all it will be. And you can see this is why so many men feel so deeply trapped. Mental health, addiction, suicide, very high these days. Despite on the surface as having more material wealth. It's a paradox. But a lot of the spiritual work is realizing the distance between who you really are and the mind. You could call it the witness of the mind, presence, and the noise of the mind. We often think every thought is us thinking it, but most of the time it's not at all. Very often what we think is just the practical things, but the thoughts that come into your head aren't really made by you. You don't decide what to think in the morning. This is why people with all sorts of paranoias and OCDs really struggle, because they take ownership for the thoughts. In religious language, it's Satan trying to mess you up, It'll bring some disgusting imagery or make you think something really horrible about yourself, and you can't let it go, and you think, why am I thinking this? But what you're doing is identifying with the thought rather than letting it pass. There's a lovely quote on that. I can't remember who it's by. It's an Orthodox monk. It's something like, we can't be held to account for sinful thoughts, but we can be held to account for attaching ourselves to them. And this is a deep spiritual practice of letting the noise of the mind go. Now, this is really so key in our masculine formation, because it's an initiation in terms to our real role as men, or for many of us as men, in providing that same stillness for a woman and down the line for the family. Now, some men will have reached out to me in the past and looked at the initiation coaching I do and said, well, is there anything like this for women? And women have sometimes asked as well back in the day. And the truth is there's not, because men and women are different. The initiation literature is very clear about this as well. Women have a different initiation to men. They're initiated by life itself, namely the period. It's pain, which is pushed on them by nature when they're very young and they don't know really what's happening. It changes their body. And pregnancy is the second initiation. Now, as someone who is a father and has been with his wife when they go through that process, you'll know it's challenging for them. It's challenging. It's painful. It's emotionally taxing. It's something I think men can't really understand. And in a sense, I really admired my wife after she went through it. I think what I really enjoyed about it is how natural it is, for a woman. They almost approach it with this stoicism, and it's kind of funny to watch, but it's the feminine in its fullness in a sense. So the point is that nature is initiating the woman, and it kind of takes control of these processes. Again, the period is an obvious one. She becomes sexualized with that. And on top of that, we have the pregnancy where, her body changes, her instincts flare up to look after the child. But when it comes to men, they tend to be initiated by other men or challenge, Nature almost leaves it to other men. And again, this is a bit more of the motif of Mother Earth and Father Spirit. This is why the females tend to be closer to the earth in their orientation and their spiritual practices, but the men, it's the spiritual guidance, which has many different layers. At its very top, it's the love of God, but there's also other things such as the traditions of the society, the values that are expressed from the divine, the sacred, into the culture and the civilization that the men ideally are supposed to become the representatives of. And they normally have to face some fear or challenge or sacrifice in order to get there. But the point I'm making in this video is very often the woman will have the same challenges that we have when we're sort of immature men of the mind, the paranoia and so on. But whereas men will tend to want freedom from that, a woman is more comfortable almost expressing it because her nature is more poetic. And as we see as we grow as men, what women are really drawn to in men, yes, the stuff on the externals is true. I'm not saying the red pill stuff doesn't have any legitimacy, the looks, money, game, status, all that's true. But that's the kind of surface level stuff about getting laid. And there is something about relationships in there. But if you want the true spiritual union, what it really is having the energy of God in you that calls to the woman. And this is a very tricky area, as you can imagine. Now, someone who's very interested in these spiritual areas, I've seen it many times, women can be very drawn to these spiritual leader figures. because they see safety in them. They think they can reveal themselves to this person, and sometimes that can even lead to revealing themselves sexually, nude and so on. And that has happened in these communities and hurt the women even more. I won't get into that now, but it's a risky area for women. It's why, I don't think it's wise to work with women at all. I mean, that's why I just focus on male initiation. It's always going to lead to trouble. You need elders and tradition to deal with the men and women, in my view. But anyway, the point I'm making is the best way I think we can deal with this is your maturation, your initiation is preparing you to be ready for that true union, which ultimately should come in marriage in the Christian tradition. Or you could just say, the true bond, where almost the masculine and feminine stop competing but complement, and then they become the one whole. It's literally, corny as it sounds, the two become one idea, one flesh, in Christian language. Now again, the point that I'm getting at the very core here is that this journey for the woman in finding the God energy in the man isn't saying, oh, you're God, I will obey you. That's not how women work. If we're thinking that, we're still on a immature, sort of adolescent level. And many men, you see this in the trad world, they sort of want to yell at women and tell them what to do. And all that's going to do is sort of fulfill the arguments of radical feminism and just lead them back into that world of being the girl boss and hating men. But deep down, they still crave the man. That's why many of the feminists end up interested in BDSM and stuff. They can't work it out, but the reality is they're starting to crave the masculine force through their sexual proclivities, even though it undermines their supposed values in the world. But the point that I'm getting at here is when we say the woman craves God in the man, it's not saying that you're God. It's this example I often give about the dance, the masculine and feminine dance you get in the Latin dances. It's not pulling her around and telling her what to do. It's showing that you can flow with the rhythm and she'll flow with you as you lead. But the rhythm is the real master. So God's love is working through you, which is stillness, steadiness. You're capable of being present enough to provide the space for the depth of her feminine chaos. This doesn't mean she's always chaotic, but it means you are deep enough to provide that still space. You don't have to tell her what to do, and she'll feel free to dance in that space, metaphorically, sometimes literally. But the point is with that then, if the situation warrants and if you need, you can offer masculine direction, but only after she's had that opportunity to express her feminine fullness. Now that is the true depth of the relationship, the true marriage. And what you're really doing there is simply just replicating what God provides for us. Again, if you don't like the God word, you could say life or presence. You look at life, it allows everything in us. This is why the contemplation is so important. Once we're out of the demands and desires of the mind in our story, we realise God's presence, love, is always consistently here. It's the very nature of life. Now, as we learn this in our own spiritual life, it's just a simple practice of replicating that and passing it on, as our role as husbands, but also as fathers, because of course the next step is providing that stillness for our children. Now the wife, the woman, also takes on a little bit of that, because in the biblical order of love, order of the family, it's God, Christ, man, woman, children. It sort of works all the way down. I'm sure feminists would have a lot to say about that, toxic and all that, but I dare say they'd misunderstand it. And to be fair, it's understandable why you would, because many Christians and men haven't lived up to what that really demands. We really do have to get down on our knees and repent when we get things wrong. We do need to be able to admit our fault, and we're never going to be perfect in this role. Sometimes we're going to be too weak, sometimes too strong, but it's about showing that willingness, throughout the challenge. I've said before, I think on the channel, this idea of the kind of Andrew Tate thing about being this sort of impenetrable man, that's just unrealistic. It's psychopathic, really. You're better off, by all means, working on being stoic and steady and relying on the love of God and going to him for guidance and then reflecting that love back through to the family. But you're going to get things wrong. And in my experience, my wife has never questioned me when I've got things wrong if, to be blunt, I'm not crying like a little bitch. If I can say, I'm dealing with this thing that's come up, some stuff in my early life, had a lot of trauma, just feeling it at the moment, I need to work it through, I need a bit of time, and I deal with it like a man. She's absolutely fine. In fact, she respects you more, But it's getting that line right. It's not turning into a modern, feminized man. Let's talk about your feelings, this sort of thing. Because you're just going to be exhibiting feminine energy and you're going to be more of a woman than she is. and she wants to be more of a man than she is. So I'm not saying we can't have problems, we can't get things wrong, but it's about showing that we have the inner capacity to deal with them. And if you don't think you have, fine, but lean on something deeper than you then, the tradition, God, presence. But the point I'm making here is we need to radiate that steadiness, that stillness. And if men don't, the world falls apart. And it might not seem like that at first. I've seen this many times. Women can take charge and it all seems normal for a bit, but you'll see things start to fall because it's the divine masculine role to be still and steady. And as I say, that's not lording it over a woman or the children in some sort of brutal tyranny. It's a role of love. It has authority that comes with it, but that authority has responsibility. And if you're a Christian, you have to answer to God. You have to take that seriously. But you also know that he, like you'll forgive your children, he will forgive you if you're open and repentant and you work on that stillness. And your wife, your woman, will trust you all the more because she feels that rock energy. And don't worry if you think, oh, it's hard to be a rock. It is hard to be a rock. There will be times where you have to do that manually. But the real rock energy comes from God. He's the real structure. And again, it's all about that contemplation, which allows us to be still. And even for now, if it's just hearing the noise of the world, the noise of your wife, even if it's just for 10 seconds, just trying to notice it without responding. Let the noise happen. Don't jump on it. If you do, it's like riding a bull. You're trying to ride the thoughts, ride the drama of your wife. But just try and work, even a little bit, on the stillness, And you'll realize that God's stillness is infinite. It's absolutely infinite. And that's on offer to you. It really is. Now, when we have men that are rooted in this energy, imagine how strong a community or a society could be. And of course, this has never been perfect in history, but it's been a lot stronger than it is now. There's no doubt about that. And when you move it away, the family falls apart, the society falls apart, the balance between the genders fall apart, women start to hate the men get tyrannical or weak on the other side. And then, of course, you have modernity. But I hope you understand the point I'm making here. As always, it's really turning to love and truth within. You've got to find the safety within first. Doesn't mean you're going to be safe in the external world. The brutalities are still going to happen. Pain will still happen. But we do find recourse for that within. And then we reflect that back out into the world in our role as fathers, where we emulate the love of God the Father and the path of Christ. At least in the Christian tradition, that's the way. But I'm sure you can take it on in a way that you can understand if religious language isn't to your liking. Anyway, I hope this video helped, thought it was worth making. Hopefully it helps some of you out there. Do join the Substack if you'd like more stuff like this, to join the free calls. If you're interested in the initiation work, reach out to me. I may try and hold one before the end of the year, depends if I have time. Certainly try and do one next year. Anyway, friends, thank you for listening. Do take care. Speak again soon.